I suppose there's the kind of formal answer and there's the informal answer. And the formal answer is that I was involved with Tom Scheinfeld in a variety of other projects already. And I was actually one of the co-PIs on the original Mellon grant. And and I mean, that was really out of the kindness of Tom's heart. It wasn't so much that I was a real driving force, but rather the way in which Greenhouse was constructed as a kind of three-legged tool. So libraries, DMD/fine arts and humanities. I was the humanities rep for that. That's now, of course, expanded out, or I mean, expanded out, at the time for the creation of the steering committee. And so I was involved, from the get-go on this. And then I was on the working group that basically kind of helped run it through that first seed grant year, into the large Mellon grant, the full grant, and now I kind of exist, in a less formal role. And so that's the formal way. And I mean, I suppose one other bit of detail about that is that, I was involved in two other very large humanities grants. So one that was internally funded by the university and one that was externally funded by the John Templeton Foundation. And these were grants that were put together to encourage work by humanists to engage in the state of polarization in the public, in the public square and public life. So we ended up linking those two grants up with the grant that became in time known as Greenhouse Studios. So in a way, we were actually sort of all involved. So we wrote kind of Greenhouse into those grants. The original Greenhouse grant had some of which became known as the Humility and Conviction in Public Life grant. Some money came from that. So it was just a really nice way to sort of build things sort of collectively and simultaneously. And there was a curious bit of brinkmanship to the whole thing, like we'd sort of promise one, I mean, not, we weren't making false promises, but we were saying to one funder, look, we have this interest over here. And if we can get that, it would allow this to happen over here. And then we sort of let those people know that we were doing this over here. So in a way, it very nicely modeled the kind of collaboration first and bringing different skills and perspectives to the table, simply to the question of funding and program building that is so central and foundational to what Greenhouse is. And then the informal one is that, I'm an historian and I'm interested in digital approaches and also the modes by which scholarly knowledge and expertise is in dialogue with broader communities. So whether it's students, whether it's the broader university community, or whether it's just folks out and about in the world. And I had started a project, and and Tom was critical in this. I mean, Tom was really the second person in on a project a very niche project on the Irish language, Irish Gaelic. And so I was a real DH skeptic, to be honest. Like, I really was not keen on this stuff. So, but anyways, that's my answer. Again, I'm an historian. I'm an historian of basically Renaissance and Reformation, Northern Europe, specifically Ireland and England, and the relationship between them. And part of what really interests me is that there are two vernaculars for the archive, right? There are English language sources and there are Irish, Gaelic sources. And I'll refer to them as Irish because there's also Scots Gaelic. So just, to distinguish the two, Irish or Scots. And very, very, very few people read the Irish sources, Irish language sources. And it's problematic because there are, there are not nearly the number of materials that you have for English, but there are quite a few in different forms, different genres, and people don't read them. And there's a debate that's been going for a long time, which is whether or not you really should know how to read Irish language stuff if you're an historian of of that society during a period when the vast majority of people were speakers of that language, right? So the analogy is, would you be a French historian or, you know, a Chinese historian and not read the language? And the answer would obviously be no. So, so I'm sympathetic to one side of that argument, which is, of course, you should know it, right? It's your job. But I'm also, you know, as an American, I'm sympathetic to the other one, you know, to the other side, which is to say, well, you know, most of the materials are in English, and so, you know, we can basically tell the tale, you know, most of the tales through that. And while I think that's kind of intellectually dishonest, I think it's structurally sound, which is to say, where are you going to learn how to do it? If you work in Old Irish, 8th, 9th century stuff, right? Their grammars, dictionaries, guides, how to read it. Modern Irish is a spoken language. You can Duolingo, you can go over there, you can do whatever you want. But the period from 1200 to 1650 or so, for which there's this great range of poetry, religious work, historical work, you know, all kinds of stuff. There's no dictionary, no grammar, no guide. So that's the background. So I was the associate director of the Humanities Institute for quite a while. And under the Sherry Harris, who was the director for a while, and it was amazing. And we had a little bit of extra money at the end of the year, and or toward the end of the year, and she said, you know, I need to give this away. I want to give this away, and but I don't want to just give it away. Like, I'll let people make their case for it. And I think maybe to draw some boundaries around this, I think I'm going to give that money away as a seed grant program for people interested in digital humanities projects. And I rolled my eyes, and you know, we had a great relationship. And she's like, "What's that for, smartass?" I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, you know, you're rolling your eyes. I'm like, most digital humanities stuff is just, you know, it's just useless. She's like, what do you mean it's useless? I'm like, it's just a data dump. You know, it's just like, here's some stuff and now it's online and you'll never see it, but I'm going to take credit for having done it. And, you know, it's like, you know, it's like dark matter in the universe. Like, you know, it's out there, but you have no idea what it is. Does it have any effect on anything? How would you ever find or identify it? And she was like, all right, tough guy. You know, she was just kind of looking at me quizzically, and I was like, I'm sure there's some great things to do with digital humanities, right? She said, well, what do you think would be a great idea then, tough guy? I was like, I'm like, oh, here's an idea. You know, and I told her what I just told you. And I said, so I could easily imagine a digital project, instead of waiting for the whole publication process, you know, to use a digital create those 3 resources, right? And because there are lots of editions of things like this. This is the Parliament of Women, Parliament Naman. It is untranslated, right? But it has a great glossary in the back. So you just take all the glossaries of editions like that that are published, put them together, voila, you have a dedicated early modern dictionary. Then you could, you know, and in the front of editions like this, there are kind of like grammar paradigms and stuff, same thing. Run them together, collate them, bam, you have a practical grammar. And then take some excerpts from different genres, break them down word by word, you know, eventually, like we decided, actually, this is Tom's idea, do it by semantic unit, explain them to people, and you have your guide, bam, bam, bam. So we started putting it together. And like I said, Tom was the first person in. I mean, I'll stop there in case you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll keep rolling.
Keep going.
Okay. So, you know, we started constructing it, and, you know, I had to get buy-in from, you know, from publishing partners, right? So the people who publish these books are the really 2 main publishers. I had to get scholars on board to help do the breakdowns, right? Because, like, I'm good at it, and I have to say I'm a lot better at it now. Like, I was decent at it now, but, you know, I wasn't trained, you know, as a philologist or a linguist. And so I didn't feel comfortable doing the breakdowns. So, you know, I was going already. I went to Ireland, and I literally, I went I just set up appointments with people, and I went to the office and I made the pitch. And part of what made that possible was that I had already gotten a couple people on board. So, like friends, colleagues. So, like a really wonderful kind of towering scholar, really of old Irish at Harvard, came on board. A colleague and friend at the University College Dublin, a guy named Mark Cable, he came on board, and I asked him, "Can I use your name?" And they're like, "Yeah, of course." So, so I just like went around, and and then a friend of mine, Peter McQuillan from Notre Dame, came on board. So got promise from people to take part. Then I needed to figure out, well, how am I gonna do this and code this and stuff? And I got this little seed grant money from the Humanities Institute. And so Tom and I sat down and we hired an MFA graduate named Andrew Bacon, who was amazing. And he helped us with all the architecture, and he actually created the Léamh image, and he's the one behind the kind of IKEA graphic quality of the thing. Like, it's pretty stripped down. And Wes Hamrick was a PhD, like recent PhD student from Notre Dame, and Notre Dame came on board generally as a supporter. And one of the ways they supported it was they supported Wes to work on the project. So Wes and I were the original content people, and we just kind of built. So that group, we just started kind of putting it together, and we went to Ireland then and sort of presented it. Like, a couple of these people who said that they would help with the breakdowns. We basically started with one piece of prose and one piece of verse, and we went to Ireland, and we presented it at a conference of Celticists, and people were into it. And and again, like, we got these like publishing partnerships. I mean, basically, like to my mind, it was an easy pitch, right? Which was, look, like, it's very important on Léamh that we pay everybody, right? Some amount, like whether it comes from Greenhouse or whether we pay you an honorarium for the work that you do. And so I goes like, look, I'm going to pay you an honorarium. I'm going to, it's a small amount of work. I'm going to let you, it's going to be credited to you online, right? More people are going to learn about your work. And to the publisher, something like, look, and we're going to help increase the number of people who feel comfortable reading the material and engaging with the material that your organization publishes. And it's free. Like, we're just going to like show up and do work for you. And people are like, is there a catch? All right, we'll do it. So at this point, so we started doing, working through various pieces. And there was something of a pedagogical theory to it, which was, if you just simply ask experts to do the breakdowns, that's going to be correct, but may not be as helpful as it might be, which is to say, if, like, say you are an expert in this stuff, and I ask you, could you just like break this down for me? I mean, if you agreed, you would just kind of do it, and like, off you go. And but I might still see that and have questions. So we decided that we would always have people at a kind of intermediate phase who could get through it, but were still learning or weren't specialists, because really the target audience for this was people in adjacent fields, whether they're in literature or political science or history or linguistics or whatever, who want to engage with the language but don't know how to do it. Like, there aren't those materials. So we always have basically a little team of like expert on the one hand to make sure everything's correct, and somebody working their way through it as a kind of example of where people might mess up. Because when we see where people mess up, we're like, right, let's spend a little bit more time explaining that bit. And so when you go to the website, you have the breakdowns of words and semantic units, but then you have what we call the detailed guide. And that's just, like, okay, friends, here are the tricky bits. And we're going to take a little bit more time to explain them. So we did that. And then Tom and I started thinking about the ways in which we might run Léamh through, because, as you know, there are various prompts for Greenhouse, and typically they were from the ground up prompts, right? Like, here's a thing we're going to do. And for example, like the humility and conviction in public life, HCPL ones, like there were 3, and we just brought people together, and like people applied for them and the like. But there was the kind of yes and prompt. and ours was, and we thought this would be a good one, right? Which is like, okay, let's take this thing, which is kind of niche and kind of growing and international and multi-institutional. Where could it go next? And so it brought in a variety of people, Tom Lee being one of them. Wes kind of directed it and continues to write the sort of, the Léamh in Greenhouse um, collaboration, or the part of Léamh that is Greenhouse. And then we brought in a recent graduate of Trinity College Dublin, a woman named Deirdre Nicard. And she was actually a student of a guy named Owen McCord, no relationship, who was one of the team, one of the kind of 2-person, really 4-person team, because me and Wes were on it, who did the very first text breakdown for Léamh, right? And so she came on board, and we brought her over, and she is, it's difficult to isolate like who are the greatest heroes of all this stuff, but she certainly is in contention. Just brilliant, absolutely brilliant as a scholar, and amazing as a colleague. So we brought her in, and so we all sat around and went through the Greenhouse process. And the Greenhouse process produced in us, or for our project, the idea that the next step down the road for teaching and learning Irish would be, because the grammar is really weird. I mean, it's not weird, it's just weird if you don't know it. And so we thought, oh, we should help people with grammar. Why don't we gamify it? And so we do a grammar game. And and Tom Lee is absolutely, like, we'd be worse than nowhere if it weren't for Tom Lee. I mean, who's just done such extraordinary work with that. So where things stand now, like if you go onto the site, like we have a bunch of people who've done things. We have a bunch of things in the works. The grammar game is in beta testing, like it's gone out, like people have reported back. We actually started working on a paleography tab, like a tab to the site on paleography, and just for anyone watching at home who may not know, which is just simply working through old handwriting, right? How do you read manuscripts? And so we're doing an Irish paleography primer. And so it's like background to the Irish hand, and then there's, a graded quiz, right? And so we're syncing that with the grammar game. So you can both learn the grammar and you can learn to read manuscripts, so we're trying for a holistic approach. And I think the last thing, I should say, about it, I mean, there's kind of lots going on with it, is that one of the things that I think is really interesting, or that's important to me about Léamh, is that it is very greenhousian, and always has been, in the sense that it is small d democratic. So for the longest time, you could go on the site, you'd have no idea who ran it. And that's not because we were hiding, but because we didn't think that was in keeping with the point. And I mean, you could find out that, I kind of kept the lights on, or Wes kind of kept the lights on, or what have you, because there was a contact thing and it just went to my email. But it was really important for us to highlight the people who did the work and the people who were the publishers. And but over time, like, we did really want to make sure that the work that people were doing was, one, kind of ownable by them, right? So they could be part of this collective, and yet there would be elements of it that they could really take as their own and use as their own in their own professional journey, right? And so we wanted to make sure those people were highlighted. And so we finally did create something, I mean, it's like a working group. So it's a working group page. And so people like Emma, sorry, I'll get to that in a sec, Deirdre, Tom, and Emmett Dbara, who turned out to be, I mean, again, like, I suppose it's impossible to make comparisons about people who are, one, both brilliant, but two, just like tireless, in their work and creativity, like to make this project a real thing. So he did an MA in history here, and he was to my great, great pleasure and privilege. He was, worked with me. He was my advisee, but he also worked with Greenhouse on sorcery, but again, with this connection between me and Tom. And we wanted to make sure that the Deirdres of the world and the Emmets of the world, the Tom Lees of the world would be able to say, look, I'm a part of this international collaboration and I've done this thing and I have that on the CV. But within that, I also have very individual work that I have done. And our friend Christina Cleary, who's now new, she's behind the paleography, but Emmett and Deirdre are critical for that. And so like they can take that and that becomes part of their CV and they can, it's not like I do it, so anyway, that's where we're at. My favorite part of it is, there's a specific and there's a general bit. And the specific bit is, of the various parts of the site, for me, like the real sort of gold is the text breakdowns. So when we go live with a new text breakdown, like for me, that is a day of pure beauty, right? Because you can go and, and there's so much work behind it. And we have a Twitter account that Wes set up and, but that I run, although he has access to it too, but he was just like, you're not good with this stuff. I just set it up. I figured you'd run with it. And, again, talk about heroes, Wes, truly one of the best people to work with. And I've been really, really fortunate and, privileged to work with him, which I think is a segue into the second thing, which is the way in which the project has been, I suppose two things. Like one, like it's really a part of the intellectual landscape now. Like people cite it. People have been in contact with us about whether or not they can use the model or they can use the architecture. And, we're invited to lots of things. So the fact that it was like this little project, but now it's become sort of really critical for people's, people's use, people like use in the classroom, people are just kind of generally interested, but also for scholars, which is fantastic. But, the third bit is the way in which it's been incredibly useful for people in terms of their professional development. Wes had no connection to UConn. He had connection to Léamh. And then he had connection to, so like, I'd like to think that, and like that was the segue in because he knew me and Tom and we were just like, oh my God, can we get this guy here? Deirdre's got this amazing 4-year postdoc, and look, it's not like Léamh got her the job or I got her the job, but it's one of the things that's helpful, right? And she can point to stuff. And Emmett's going back to do a PhD at Trinity College Dublin. And, like, again, this is something he can take with him. And the way in which that it really is something that people can use in these individual ways, I think is one, specifically great for them, but I think it's also really useful in this discourse about the difference between scientific models or modes of knowledge production and credit versus humanistic ones. And it's often seen that these are very different things or different approaches. But I think Léamh is one of those examples that demonstrate that that's actually not true, right? So the thing that's difficult is the human management, right? And a lot of that means, like, I joke, a lot of it is Brendan management, right? I have vastly too much stuff on my plate, way too much going on. And like a lot of this is like old school diplomacy. Like you have to go, like, how do I convince a publisher that they should release their materials for free to be digitized on this project by some dude in Connecticut, and convincing people like to do the work, nudging them, but also apologizing to people when they've sent things to me and I'm a month late getting back to them because I've got too much work going somewhere else, or I'm like on vacation, or I'm just like losing my mind. And I think the most difficult thing is, like, this is one of the differences between traditional publication on the one hand, or I think a particular mode of digital humanities, which I think has limited use, which is the dead project, right? Or the finished, like if I publish a book, and I've published books, I'm done. It's good. I can go off and do whatever I want. Or if I just do a digital project, I'm like, done. but this is a living, breathing, growing thing. And, it's like my third child, it's just like, it's like, oh, right, it's still there. It needs to be fed. It asks me things like, oh my God, it's out in the world. I have to like, be responsible for it. Or so, I think lots of people aren't ready for that kind of stuff. And I think trying to balance that within your own kind of like work balance as well as work life balance is really difficult, but also trying to make sure you can kind of maintain those relationships. So in the kind of brave new world of the digital and stuff, I think the real foundational skills and challenges are fundamentally humanistic in this one.